Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Our reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verses 3 through 9. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will be also told in memory of her." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and hearing of his word.
If you were to do an internet search of outrageous celebrity expenses, which I understand is a weird thing to Google, but if you were to do that, probably on every site that would show up, you would probably see a picture of Rihanna. Rihanna reportedly spends $1 million per year on her hair. Now, as someone who is a big believer in the value of great clips, that is a lot of Great Clips haircuts. Like, I did the math. I'd have to go to Great Clips 180 times per day, and that's tipping generously just to match the amount of money that she spends on her hair. You would also see pictures of Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is notorious for outrageous expenses. There's stories about him buying Scottish castles, dinosaur skulls from China, $1 million comic book collections. I mean, he just burns through money for frivolous things. You might also see a picture of Kanye West, who bought 4 gold-plated toilets for his Bel Air mansion. Now, you want to know how much a gold-plated toilet cost? Those 4 toilets cost $750,000. I can only imagine after they've been used that they are worth far less. You know, I'm just imagining. The depreciation on that has to be real high. I think about Barbie dolls. Now, when Margaret was little, we would buy Barbies, and I remember they were like $5, or, like Black Friday sales, right? And so you would think that Beyonce and Jay-Z were being frugal when they got their daughter a Barbie doll for her very first birthday, except the Barbie doll they got was encrusted with diamonds and cost $80,000. Now, if any of your kids ever had Barbie dolls, you know what they look like the first time the kids take a bath with them, right? And mess with their hair. Can you imagine that happening to an $80,000 doll? But that's what they spend it on. I love my dogs, right? But not like Paris Hilton loves her dogs. Paris Hilton bought a doghouse that cost $325,000. That's a picture of the actual doghouse. You can see the stairways going up. It has doggy furniture. It has crystal chandeliers, air conditioning inside, plus the balcony that's outside. $325,000. But I think the celebrity that takes the cake for most extravagant isn't a celebrity who is still living. It's someone we all know and love, the King, Elvis Presley, who was just notorious for being frivolous with his money. My favorite story about Elvis is one night he was hungry, and he wanted a very particular kind of sandwich he had a craving for. The problem was that this sandwich was only made in Denver, Colorado, and he happened to be at Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee. So that night, he boarded his private plane, the Lisa Marie, flew to Denver. The owner of the restaurant, he pre-ordered, brought him the sandwiches. He ate them in the hangar. He got back in the plane and flew home. Now, you might be thinking, what kind of sandwich is worth that kind of time and money? Well, the name of the sandwich was called Fool's Gold. It was a whole loaf of bread that was hollowed out and filled with a whole jar of peanut butter, 1 pound of bacon, and fresh blueberry preserves. The sandwich itself costs $50. If you throw in the flight and the gas, I don't even know what kind of price tag you would put on it, right? Just because someone had a late night craving and Taco Bell, I guess, wasn't in existence then, you know? It's just crazy. And you hear these stories, we hear these stories, and we think, what nonsense. I mean, how empty and vain and selfish and wasteful. I mean, I ticked off the dollars that were spent. Can you imagine if all that money had been spent for something good and purposeful? The amount of help that could have been given to people in need? And I simply tell you all these stories to put us in an emotional place, because that's how the disciples reacted when this woman brought the alabaster jar and broke it over Jesus' feet. Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman historian of the time, he said the very finest perfumes of that time and region were found in alabaster jars. The jars, this is an actual first century alabaster jar. It was designed so that you would break off the top, the neck of the jar, and then you would pour the perfume out from there. And this woman, you know, you would normally pour it out in measures, like just a little bit at a time, because it was worth so much. But this woman pours out the entirety on Jesus' feet, and the disciples are shocked and scandalized, because this perfume could have been sold for a year's worth of wages. Think how much you earn in a year, wasted, gone in just seconds. And of course, they say it's disgraceful, it's wasteful. They rebuke her. What are you doing? Stop! Don't waste that. And whatever adjectives you may want to add to that list, Jesus says, no, what she is doing is beautiful. Beautiful. Because she has done something for me that is kind and generous. And indeed, I tell you, wherever my story is told over the course, over the face of the earth, what she has done for me will be told as well. And indeed, her story appears in all 4 Gospels. It's one of the few stories that's in all 4 Gospels. Now, there's a lot of differences, I guess, between that woman and what she did and the celebrities that I showed. I mean, some of the differences that kind of come off the top of my head. One is the celebrities are all famous, right? Like, we may not like their music or their movies, but we know their names because they're in the headlines all the time. We don't know this woman's name. She appears in all 4 Gospels, but not once is her name recorded. She's anonymous. She's not a celebrity, right? On top of that when those celebrities spent that money, it didn't leave them impoverished. Well, except for Nicolas Cage, who I think declared bankruptcy at some point. But all the rest of them, they had money to burn. Like they could spend this kind of money and they still had excess to spare, but not this woman. When she gives out of her poverty. Like whether she, saved up to buy this perfume or whether it was gifted to her by a family friend or a mother or a grandmother, you have to imagine this is the richest possession that she has to offer. And of course, that's the big difference, is that she was offering it to someone else. All those celebrity examples I gave, they were just spending it selfishly on themselves. They were satisfying their own crazy whims or improving their status in some game to prove who has more, but not this woman. She pours it out selflessly as an act of love. I mean, what would make someone take something so precious and pour it out for someone else? As I said, the story appears in all 4 Gospels. And so for just a moment, I want to jump to Luke's gospel. In Luke's gospel, it's a very different story. For starters, the story in Luke's gospel occurs in Luke chapter 7, early in Jesus' ministry, not at the end in Bethany. And instead of it being at Simon the leper's house, it's at Simon the Pharisee's house. And in Mark's gospel and the other gospels, it's kind of a private gathering of friends where this woman appears. But in Luke's gospel, it's a very public setting. Jesus is invited to a dinner party that Simon the Pharisee is hosting. And Simon would have invited all the who's who of the town, all the movers and shakers and influencers to come together and meet this Jesus. And all the other members of the town, it probably would have been an outdoor courtyard where all the important who's who would have sat at the center table, and everyone else, all the public, could kind of sit on the edges and watch. And when Jesus was invited into this party, there would have been a certain set of protocol, like ways of receiving a guest of honor that would have been followed in that day. When someone would have come as a guest of honors, they would have been greeted with a kiss. They would have been offered a little bit of perfume, a scented oil to rub into their scalp and refresh them from the day. And they would have been offered a servant to wash their feet and wash off all the grime. Simon the Pharisee did none of those things. And by doing none of those things, he's kind of sending a not so subtle message to everyone that this Jesus is really not that important. He's not all that. He's not what he claims to be. He is publicly snubbing Jesus. And there happens to be a woman in the crowd, one of those, just part of the public that's looking on and seeing this happen. And she sees how Jesus is treated, and it breaks her heart, and so she tries to rectify the situation. She goes back to her home and gets the only oil, the perfume that she has, which happens to be from an alabaster jar. And she comes into the party, and while the who's who are discussing things, she breaks into their polite conversation, breaks open the jar, and pours the perfume on Jesus' feet. And she's so overtaken with emotion in that moment that she begins to cry and weep on Jesus' feet, and she washes it with her hair. Now, we don't know how this woman knew Jesus. We don't know if they'd had a prior relationship and he befriended her when no one else would. We don't know if she had overheard him speaking or if she only knew him by reputation. What we know is that she loved Jesus and she wanted to show it. Now, in Luke's gospel, the scandal is not how much the perfume cost. No one cares how much the perfume costs. In Luke's gospel, the scandal is the kind of woman she is. That she is a known sinner in all the town. She is someone who you don't associate with and that you certainly don't allow to touch your feet. And so Simon the Pharisee thinks to himself, he says, this is proof that this Jesus is no prophet. He's no one that we need to respect, because if he was a prophet, he would know what kind of woman this is, and he would not allow her to touch his feet. And Jesus knows the thoughts of his heart. And so Jesus responds and says, Simon, I have a question for you. He sets up a scenario. He says, say there's two men who owe a certain moneylender a debt. And the debts are different for each of them. One of them owes 500 denarii, the other 50, but neither one can afford to pay what they owe. And so the moneylender wipes their debt free. And then Jesus asks the question, which one of these two will love him more? And Simon gives the obvious answer, I suppose, he says, the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. And Jesus said, you have judged correctly. What Simon didn't realize is he just stepped into a trap. Because Jesus says to him, when I came in, you didn't give me any oil. You didn't offer a servant to wash my feet. You didn't even greet me with a kiss. And yet, this woman has poured out the most expensive oil she has. She wiped my feet with her tears and with her hair, and she hasn't stopped kissing my feet. In other words, for all of your righteousness, you've been forgiven little, and therefore you love little. And meanwhile, this woman, who you claim is a sinner that everyone else knows, I tell you, because she has been forgiven much, she has expressed her love much. In other words, Simon, in judging correctly, has judged his own heart. Oswald Chambers once wrote, he said, "If human love does not carry a man beyond himself, it is not love. If love is always discreet, always wise, always sensible and calculating and measured, never carried beyond itself, it is not love at all. It may be affection, it may be warmth of feeling, but it has not the true nature of love in it." The point isn't go out and sin big so that then you can be forgiven a lot and feel like you love. The point is I just want to ask, how extravagant is your love? How deeply are we aware of how much we have been loved? Are we like Simon the Pharisee, who because we've been forgiven little, love little, or are we more like the woman who's recognized how deeply we have been forgiven and loved, and therefore we respond? The point is not go out and sin big. The point is recognize how deeply, how extravagantly you have been loved. How deeply and completely you have been forgiven. Because when we allow God's grace to truly touch our hearts, it sets us free. We become more open and generous and overflowing with love. As I said, today is a commitment Sunday. And a commitment Sunday is a strange time to teach this particular story about the woman who is washing Jesus' feet. Because let's be honest, in today's story, who do you think the pledger is? It's probably, if there's anyone in the crowd who was a pledger and a tither, who was it? Simon the Pharisee, right? He's the one who's been calculating how much to give, and I mean, he's pledged it out, right? Like, he's figured, he's an example that can hold it up for everyone else. And yet, this woman, what she does is this extravagant, over-the-top act of love. But let's flip it around just a little bit. Because I think commitment in some ways is the biggest Geronimo leap that you can ever make. I mean, especially if it's a real commitment, not an easy commitment that you know you can fill, but if you are really throwing yourself out there into the great unknown, taking that Geronimo leap, in some ways that is the most reckless and least sensible thing you can do. When two people pledge their lives to each other, when they stand up here and make a marriage vow through sickness and health and rich and poor, thick and thin, it's probably the dumbest thing they could ever do because they don't know what the future holds. And yet it's the most extravagant and beautiful act of love someone could ever make. I just want to quickly recap everything we've been talking about the good life. We've seen that the good life it recognizes enough, right? That the good life isn't cluttered with projects and things. It's rich instead with relationships. And we've seen that the good life has stepped off the treadmill of perfection. That we're not constantly seeking after perfection that we'll never ever reach, but instead we're focused on connection with other people and connection with God. And then last week we talked about, as Perry kind of mentioned, summarized in his prayer, how the good life is filled with purpose and value. That the good life abounds in good works because it seeks to bring good to every relationship and interaction it has. And finally, I just want to kind of put the cherry on top this way, and I just want to say that life cannot be good unless it is touched by overflowing and extravagant love. You can do all those things but have not love, and you're just a clanging gong, a sounding cymbal. It's love that makes the difference in our lives. It's when we experience God's love and when we share God's love, that's when our lives and our hearts become good. So let me take you back to Mark's gospel for just a moment. You see, Jesus recognizes what this woman does as beautiful because he knows something of extravagant, no holds barred love. Because that's what Jesus is about to do. He has pre-committed himself to dying on a cross for all of us. And that plan is about to go into action. In just the next day or two, it's about to take place. And so Jesus says to all the disciples who are listening, what she has done is a beautiful thing because she has prepared my body for its burial. Just as she has broken the jar, my body is going to be broken for you. Just as she poured out the perfume, so I will pour out my life, my love for your salvation. You don't understand what she's done yet. You haven't seen the end picture. But I tell you, what she has done has foreshadowed what I'm about to do. This wasteful, this scandalous, this ridiculous act of love that you were so quick to judge. That's the way I love you. As I said, today is about commitment. But I don't want you to miss that it's really about love. It's really about love. Is your heart touched by God's love? And then whatever commitment you make is just a response to that love. And when we get to the end of the service, there will come a moment where we bring forward commitment cards and place them in the baskets that are on the altar. But I tell you, if you're not sure that you've ever experienced God's love, or if it's been a while and that love you feel like has grown cold, I encourage you, don't make a commitment today. I know I'm looking at Todd, my finance chair, and Dick. I mean, you guys may not want me to say that, but I'm serious. Today, if you're not sure that your heart's been touched with God's love, don't make that commitment. Instead, take out a little slip of paper and write down a prayer for what you wish you would know in your heart of God's love, and put that in the basket. That would be a far better offering to God than an empty commitment. But if you have had your heart touched by God's love, then I just want you to think, how do you respond? What will you give? What kind of gift reflects and honors what God has done for us? And what you write down on that card, where you serve or how often you'll pray or how much you'll give, that is completely between you and God. But my hope and my prayer is whatever that gift is, whatever it is on the card, that it represents a heart that has been set free by God's love. And that when we bring it forward and we put it on the altar, that we can have the same kind of heart in us that woman had when she brought the alabaster jar and broke it open on Jesus' feet. That we would have that same kind of love and gratefulness and thanksgiving. Because when Jesus saw that kind of love, you know what he said about it? He said, it's beautiful. It's good. So God has poured out his blessings on us in so many ways. We spent the last month reflecting on those goodness and all those blessings. And before we make our commitment here, I just want to take one more time for us to reflect on all the ways that God has blessed us individually and as a church. So our team has put together this video and this song, and it's going to play in just a moment. And as you watch it, I just want to invite you to reflect. How has God blessed me? How has God loved me? And how can I return that love to him? Will you join me in a word of prayer? Oh, gracious God, the gift that you have given us, the gift of your Son, it is not a gift that we could ever repay. And yet, God, you call us to receive it and to participate in it. And so we pray, God, that as we consider our pledges this morning, as we make that act of commitment, that it would be a step into knowing your love a little more deeply in our lives and sharing that love a little more openly with our world. Bless us as we watch this video. Help us to remember all the ways in which you have blessed us as a body, as a church. We thank you, God, for the many blessings which you give us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I breathe, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire, darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. Hey, all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have
weeks ago, I got a card in the mail, came to our office, and it was from a member of our church. And this member of our church has been dealing with cancer the last couple months. And they haven't been able to come to church because they haven't been feeling able. But he wrote to me and he just said, I want you to know we've been watching every week on the internet, and it's been such a blessing and a encouragement to us. And in his envelope, he enclosed a check. He said, I just want to make a contribution to all the work, the costs, and the technology that goes into making our services live streamed. And that touched me so much. I mean, to know everything that he was going through in his personal life, and yet in that moment he said, I want to give a response of thanks because this has blessed me, this has been good to me, and I want to share and help it give and encourage to someone else as well. That's what we're doing now when we make our commitment. It's just simply recognizing, God, you have blessed us. We want to share those blessings with others. And so as we sing our closing worship song, I'm going to invite you to come forward, bring your commitment card and place it in one of these baskets. And as you do so, may we have the heart of the woman, breaking open the jar and pouring out our love, knowing that God's goodness is running after us.